what about law-breaking and family closeness and sexual behavior? Has he looked at first, second, and third generation immigrants to North America?
Have you looked at different rates in the MAOA2R variant? You guys should look that up. That's a red pill.
What is their behavior as they become different people from the original culture in which their parents grew up? And if there is a genetic basis, what do you do about intermarriage? What happens with the offspring there? Is there any kind of dominance? Do they behave more like Orientals than like whites? What happens to white people that go and live in Japan or China? Are they as aggressive and loud and criminal as people over here? My bet is that the behavior of people in intermarriages or interracial crosses depends on the forcefulness of either parent, which one they resemble, and not race. The overwhelming impression...
No, they just average. It's been studied 1,000,000 times. They just average. He doesn't know any of it, though. Remember, this was how it got refuted. A baby. A baby. An intellectual baby. Know your history, guys. Know your history.
The question of just looking at immigrants is the incredible plasticity of human beings. Indeed, it is our adaptability to new situations that is a major survival attribute of our species, not a rigid genetically programmed fate and behavior. Richard Lewontin of Harvard has pointed out that if you want a genetic basis for complex human behavior by looking at pedigrees, the best case that we have for the inheritance from parents to offspring of a human behavior is which party you vote for in elections and your religious affiliation. Other than that, there isn't a hell of a lot. And yet we're extrapolating to all of these airy-fairy things, like human behavior and lawlessness and so on. Poverty and discrimination are supposed to somehow be subordinated to this genetic imperative? Come on, let's get serious. In view of the enormous variation within races, within a race, to use within...
That's the Job from Arrested Development argument. Come on! My argument's wearing a $2,000 suit. Come on! He's literally come-oning. He's the original Wow Just Wow guy.
In a category called a race, to use only 3 categories, white, black, and oriental, and then select very much the data that fit this so-called progression. You know, it's kind of like saying I was in South America and all South Americans walk in line. That is the 2 that I saw do. It doesn't mean very much.
Do you challenge the sample size of Rushton or Jensen's work? If so, you should bring that up as an argument.
Rushton implies that there is a direction or progressive change in evolution, from big penises to smaller ones, from promiscuity to fidelity, from small brains to big brains. There's no such thing. The species only imperative in evolution.
He's always missing the word because or why. Like, that'll be fun to go back through this when I listen to it again. I don't know. It's not like a yearly ritual for me, I guess. I've just seen this so many times. But I just want to see if there's if the word because is in here at all. They're just unsupported statement after unsupported statement.
And is to pass genes on to another generation by whatever means. Thus, the degeneration of the eyes in a blind cave newt is just as progressive as the increase in brain size of a mammal. There's no progression. Evolution uses whatever happens to be there. Finally, Rushton makes a very, very common error, one that I'm afraid will be made increasingly by his brothers, the molecular biologists. And that is, he has collected, and many argue that he has highly selected his data to conform to an idea. He claims to show a collection of traits that correlate with the evolutionary appearance of races. But going from correlation to causal relationship is totally unwarranted. It's as if you studied people with lung cancer and discovered that 80% of people with lung cancer have stained fingers and teeth, and then conclude that stained fingers and teeth cause cancer. Well, I could go on. The word over these data, they simply are not worth dwelling on because they seem to give legitimacy to what he's claiming. Your response to some of the stuff he was saying is, I think is indicative of that we must look at this and simply say this isn't science. For God's sake, if you're serious about this, do all of the proper controls, do all of the other analyses about interracial marriage, about successive generations growing up in different countries, before you even dare to make such outrageous statements. Thank you.
So, all this cheering, but really think about what they're cheering for. His argument amounted to, we don't know, we can't know, we don't want to know if this is true or not. They're cheering, thunderously applauding for the prayer of ignorance. They're praying for ignorance. Imagine this was like a math problem, right? And two people were trying to solve a math problem. And one person says, the solution is 42. And the other person says, we can't know the answer to this problem. And the people who are watching this intellectual deathmatch play out of these two world-class mathematicians duking it out on stage to figure out this problem. And the first person comes up with an answer and provides the proof for why it's right. And the second person says, I don't know the answer. Your answer can't be right because it would be politically infeasible for us to have a good society if that answer was right. And it's wrong for us to even try to solve this problem. And I don't have an answer. And everyone, and not only that, I don't want to find out the answer. I give up, and everyone in this room should give up on this problem. Give up on the problem. And everyone just went nuts. They were like, yeah, that's the answer to our science. The answer is we should stop thinking. We should stop using our brains. Yeah, they go nuts. That's literally what happened here. But it's because of the money. It's because of the politics. It's because of the power. The fact is, in academia, your position is privileged because you're protected by communist architecture all around you. The entire system is buoyed by this blank slate ideology, which is why it's so funny that Steven Pinker is doing what he's doing this week about the alt-right. But maybe we'll get to that later.
I'd like to thank both the speakers. We now come to the question period portion of this evening. We have approximately 45 minutes left. We will be taking questions sequentially from mics 1 through 4. If you please form a line behind a microphone if you're interested in asking a question. You may direct your question either to Dr. Rushton, to Dr. Suzuki, or to both. We'll begin with a question from microphone number 1.
Dr. Rushton, I'm a student of neither psychology nor of genetics, but I am a student of science. And the first thing they teach you in the 9th grade is that when you're conducting an experiment, the most important factor is the control of variables. Now, in your research, the point where you get to make the strongest case for the isolation of genetics, aside from socioeconomic condition, is the adoption of black children into white families. But nowhere in your paper have I seen any data which shows the effects of adoption on white children in white middle-class families. There are a lot of emotional and sociological problems that exist with adopted children. Where did those factors come into play in your decision?
There are hundreds of adoption studies. I'm sorry I only mentioned one.
Minnesota Twin Study is the best one on this. You guys should look it up.
And most of those adoption studies, in fact, have been carried out on white children. Some of the ones are coming out of Scandinavia, literally have thousands of children who are adopted. And the findings are, it doesn't matter whether you look at longevity, for example, which just came out in the New England Journal of Medicine, obesity, for example, also came out in the New England Journal of Medicine. What they show on thousands of children is that the best predictor of whether you are obese or not, and whether you die early, for example, before the age of 55, is the biological parent that you had who you never saw, or at least after the first 6 months of your life, and absolutely no prediction occurs from knowledge of the adopting.
I don't mean to interrupt, but how did white children adopted into white middle-class families specifically score on IQ tests and other tests of intelligence and temperament?
Exactly the same thing as for longevity and for obesity. With IQ test scores and for educational achievement, it is compatible with a high heritability. Biological parents are the best predictors of how children perform, not the parents who bring them up for 17 or 20 years. It's a quite amazing finding. And
Variable controlled.
it's a new finding because the first few studies that came out of those adoption studies looked
Variable controlled is the new thought patrolled.
at children when they were 7 or 10 or 13 years of age. And when those studies were published, it really looked like the upbringing environment was important. Now the longer term studies have been done when these children are 17, 20 and 25, and what you find is that around puberty, around 13 or 14 years of age, the genotype takes over. And the adopting parent, the parent who raises the child, no longer has an effect on that child, but the biological parent still continues to exert an effect via the genes. So it's just compatible with a high heritability for IQ.
Look, you have to be very, very careful in this kind of discussion. I mean, who the hell would ever argue with what he just said? You know, that's not surprising. He may have been surprised. That's not surprising that genes affect the appearance of the various characteristics. But it's one thing to talk about obesity. It's a very different thing to say that you're color-coded somehow to be a criminal when you get older, on average. And damn it all...
MAOA2R variant. I mean, how do you argue with that? Of course, they didn't know about it in 1989. But the fact is, races do have different rates of carrying the MAOA2R variant, the warrior gene, the one that is massively, massively correlated to delinquency, crime, aggressiveness, and dominance. So, you know, I guess you can test for it.
I've just said over and over, you cannot make that statement because you can't control for the environmental effects of racism. So don't legitimate the discussion by listening to this stuff about the inheritance in adopted families.
You're in a debate. You're literally in a public forum debate saying, don't legitimize this debate. Don't legitimize this debate. Cancel this. Nullify ourselves. Go quietly into that dark night. Dissolve into blackness. Fade. Curtains close. End your existence. Turn your brain off.
And all that. Let's be careful and focus on what the issue is.
Look,